Welcome to Native Bidaské, Native News Online's weekly spotlight on the people making news and leading change in Indian country.
Welcome to another episode of Native Bidaské. I'm Levi Rickert, founder, editor, publisher of Native News Online. And this year we have committed to one Native Bidaské per month to deal with health issues. And so we have a health issue that was just, actually we published a story yesterday called The Rise of Indigenous Doulas that our senior reporter, Jenna, who's with us tonight, actually wrote, and she co-published it in Elle magazine. Is that right, Jenna?
That's right.
Supported by the Pulitzer Center. We're proud of that. And anything else you want to talk about, Jenna, about this article? We just felt like this subject is such a strong subject, needs to be amplified a little bit. So we wanted to devote this Native Bidaské with it. And Jenna, you have a very special guest with you tonight. Tell us about her.
This is Camie Goldhammer. Hi, Camie. Welcome.
Hi.
Camie and I first got in touch. Well, first, Camie's a Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate tribal citizen. She's a clinical social worker, a lactation consultant, and a full-spectrum Indigenous doula who lives in Seattle. Since 2019, Goldhammer has developed a team of 5 Indigenous doulas in a company called Hummingbird Indigenous Family Services, which is the basis of the reporting that was just published that I reported over the course of several months with Camie and a few of her staff members and a few mothers in Seattle and Seattle Indian Health Board members as well. And since the founding in 2019, this doula service has provided culturally specific help to more than 150 Native pregnant women and their babies in the first 1,000 days of their babies' lives. And their maternal infant and mortality rate has been 0, which is something that is astounding against the backdrop of what it otherwise is in the Washington State Health Report that came out earlier this year and also across Indian country and Turtle Island as a whole. But Camie is also she has a second business traveling across Indian country for her second job as a lactation consultant with her business partner, who is Diné, Kimberly Moore-Salas. Is that how I say her last name?
Yeah.
Yep. And she trains Native people as breastfeeding peer counselors. And to date, you said you just hit 550 trainees, right, Camie? And you're coming live from San Antonio, Texas?
San Antonio, training number 34. So, yeah.
Training number 34.
That is fantastic.
Fantastic. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, it's you're coming at this issue from really all angles. As a mother, as an Indigenous woman living in Seattle, as the founder of these both companies that work on both like the food sovereignty and breastfeeding side, as well as the doula side. So maybe to start, Camie, can you just give your intro, anything that I may have missed, and frame the scope of your work at Hummingbird and also what you're doing here in San Antonio?
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I'm Petu Ashtemi Takiapi. Good evening or good day, relatives. Yeah, I'm Camie. I'm Sisseton-Wahpeton Oyate, and I'm really happy to be here with you both and everyone who's listening. Yeah, I don't even know where to start, I guess, but at Indigenous Services, which is a nonprofit based out of Seattle, we are an organization that's really devoted to serving Native moms, birthing people, and their babies. But we always say like our focus is the parent. That's our client. That's who we're focused on supporting, because when we support parents, that allows babies to thrive, right, and gives them the ability to reach their fullest potential when their parents are loved and cared for. And so that's really our goal with our work.
Thank you to our platinum sponsor, the American Dental Association, for making this live stream possible.
So our mission is healthy Indigenous babies born into healthy Indigenous families, supported by healthy Indigenous communities. So we really are kind of looking at this at the micro level of just one-on-one support, one family at a time, but also looking at the role that we play as community members in caring for these families. And we do that through our doula program, which I'm really happy to talk about, which is our foundational program at Hummingbird. We would not exist if it wasn't for our doulas and the support that we provide to community through our doula program, our birth keeper program. We also have our Pili Makua home visiting program, which provides home visiting support to families for the first 3 years of a child's life. And then we just launched Hummingbird Nest, which is our guaranteed basic income program, which will provide 150 Native moms with $1,250 a month, no strings attached cash until their child's third birthday. So those are, like our core programs within Hummingbird. We also have an amazing storytelling program that we just launched and evaluation, which both those programs are really going to be focused on telling the stories of our Nest participants and recipients and evaluating what cash does for families, when we give people money who need it.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so to back up a little, I think it's important framing, which I left out in the beginning. So I first got in touch with you, Camie, when I was learning about reporting rather on Kings County's racism as a public health crisis and the money that was being allocated towards Black and Indigenous groups in Kings County to address different aspects of structural racism, and the aim that you and your business were taking aim at was maternal mortality rates. And so we know from this report that came out of Washington State's Health Department in February of this past year that Indigenous women in Washington State die 8.5 times more than their white counterparts and more than any other race in the state.
Hold on, Jenna. Did you just say 8.5 times more than non-Native counterparts?
8.5 times more, right, Camie? 8.5
Yes,
times more.
That's correct.
That is downright astounding. So
Yeah.
the work that you're doing is obviously needed. Yes.
It's astounding. And so that was so astounding to me when I was learning about it and interviewing Camie for back when you were applying for the pool of money before you got the pool of money, which congrats. But that was months and months ago. And then I was through interviewing you and understanding how your mission was also to address intergenerational trauma and healing through a lot of this work. It was fascinating and a story in and of itself. I couldn't believe the statistic, Levi, the 8.5 times statistic. So Camie, I think the first question that our readers likely want to understand that I knew I wanted to understand is, can you frame that issue of why is it 8.5 times higher? What are the structural barriers that Indigenous birthing people are facing in this nation, in Washington State?
Yeah. I mean, there is so much that goes into it. The one thing that I really want to stress is that it's not the fault of Native mothers.
Right.
That's one thing that I can, that we know for sure. There's a lot of other contributing factors, but what we are often told from society, from healthcare providers, that we as Native moms are at fault for dying, right? We're too fat, we're too addicted, we're too, don't care about our babies. We don't engage in prenatal care. We don't, all of this stuff. And that's not it at all. And in fact, we see the exact opposite of that. And when we look at other communities who experience those same things, they're not dying at the same rate, right? And so that's why we need to look at the systemic barriers and the systemic contributing factors there. So, excuse me, and I'm getting over a cold, so still have a little cough, but some of the things that we see is provider bias. There is definitely an issue around racism. Within providers, we have when we look at providers, they are overwhelmingly not from the communities that are being, Native community. That's not who's serving us. There's a lot of providers that, again, it's not intentional. This isn't, we don't think that any doctor is out there trying to kill Native moms, or anything like that. But their bias, their intern, their the institution and the systems that they've grown up in, that they've been raised in, all kind of contribute to the way that they treat families, particularly moms of color. So we see, a lot of, issues around that, families or moms like not being cared for appropriately, not being listened to, not being heard when they are having issues or concerns. We see the exact same thing with our Black sisters that have very similar rates nationally, right? In Washington, there's much larger disparities between the Black and the Native Black and Native moms, but nationally, we're kind of, constantly like fighting for the bottom in those ways. But yeah, so that's some of the stuff we see. There's a lack of quality perinatal care. When we look at reservation communities, the distance that moms have to go for prenatal care to have their babies. They're often in small border towns where there's even more, maybe not implicit racism. There could be like explicit racism, where like moms aren't cared for appropriately there. So that's some of it. And then just in general, like the maternal care system is just really not conducive to anyone having babies. And I know that's something, Jenna, you and I have talked about. And I've said like most people's bar for having a baby is that they don't die, right? Like that's most people's standard of like, I just want to survive and leave with a healthy baby. And that's actually a really low bar. Like that's not a bar that we set for families. Like I expect our families all to live, but I also expect them to come out feeling whole, feeling loved, being supported, secure, feeling like they are the sacred beings that they are, that they just brought their babies down from the star world, right? Like all of these things. And that's something that most families aren't experiencing, even our white sisters, who, we have the highest maternal mortality rate in the world for a developing nation. And so it's not, it's not just Native moms, but of course those disparities exist and have to be acknowledged. So those are some of the things that we see in our program and the families that we serve. And it's pretty incredible what a little bit of support, can do. The other thing I do really want to point out with the maternal mortality rate is that in Washington state specifically, about 80% of maternal deaths are considered preventable. Wow. And about 30% of those deaths occur within the day after a baby is born and 42 days postpartum, right? 1/3 of maternal deaths occur in that time. And I always think it's really important to point out that most moms are being seen by their doctor the first time after they leave their hospital at day 45. So, just the way we have it set up, that people go home after having a baby are often isolated for a multitude of reasons. And then they're alone for weeks on end. No one's checking up on them. No one's making sure that everything's going okay. No one's bringing them good, healthy food. No one's bringing, giving, participating in ceremony for them, right? Like no one's really doing that. And that just leaves these moms in this place where they're really susceptible to death, like whether that's hemorrhage, suicide, overdose. I mean, those are things that are really important to talk about.
So the doula program has really helped address that problem, that astounding number, 8.5 times, which I will comment that so often as Native people, people are told, get over it. And that happened in the past. I guess my point is this is happening now.
It's right now. Absolutely.
So, all the bad things that happened to Native people were in the past. That's not true. It's happening now. Hey, tell our audience, for those who are not familiar with the term doula, what is a doula?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So a doula, the way we describe a doula, so I'll just first say like a doula, is, I believe the history of the word doula is it's a Greek word that is basically like an enslaved woman that like cares for another woman. So we've been working hard. So at Hummingbird, we call our doula program, we're birth keepers. That's our position. like the position that we hold. Doula, though, is still like the most common word. And so we use it a lot of times interchangeably. But the way we describe a doula, or what an Indigenous doula is we fulfill the traditional role of auntie. We provide non-medical, emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental support. So it's that holistic support to a person during the perinatal period. For Hummingbird, we're a full spectrum doula program. So we provide that support to families or pregnant people, regardless of the outcome of their pregnancy. So we support people who are experiencing pregnancy loss, are terminating a pregnancy, are trying to conceive and are on that journey, which is another really isolating journey for a lot of Native people. And then, of course, a majority of our families are coming to us because they're pregnant and they're planning to parent. And so we provide that support to them.
So before I turn it back over to Jenna, I have a question that relates to the doula program that you have. You incorporate culturally based, maybe some traditional practices. Mm-hmm. We knew that, as you mentioned, aunties maybe done in the past. And tell us about that.
Yeah. So we serve for Hummingbird, all of our pregnant people have to identify as Native. That's the client for us, right? So we don't serve people who are like non-Native but married to a Native, maybe having a baby, have a baby daddy that's Native, right? Like that's not our population that we serve. So for us, it is the mom, and the reason is because we're really hoping to combat maternal mortality. That's our goal, right? And culture is a big part of that. So all of our birth keepers are Native, Pacific Islander, Native Hawaiian. So that's the population we serve. And we do our best to provide culturally matched care. Of course, as you guys both know too, like urban Native populations are extremely diverse. We have over 300 tribes represented in Seattle. It was a relocation city. So we have just a really diverse population in the urban area. And so we can never do we can't always do an exact cultural match, with the doula. Like whenever we get a Lakota or Dakota client, I'm like, I'll take them, I'll do that, or whatever. But yeah, so when we think about incorporating culture into our care, it really is based on the family and what their culture is. We're luckily really connected to a lot of there's incredible birth work that's happening all over the United States or all over Turtle Island, throughout Indian country. And so when we have a Navajo mom, I absolutely would reach out to Kim, who's Navajo, and be like, hey, I need your cedar bead hookup. What's her name again? So I can make sure I get that bracelet that baby should have when they're born. Hey, blue corn, I need some whitefish. I need to get these things. I need some white pine for pregnancy loss. There's just all these different things that we're going to do with families, but it really is family centered. Some of our families, that's not necessarily what they want. They just want someone that looks like them and knows their lived experience. They don't necessarily, they're not super tradition. That might make them feel a little awkward doing that. So we don't force that on folks. But we have a lot of people who want it, because for a lot of people, when they're pregnant, that's when they're starting to think about, what can I pass down to my baby, right? And that's when a lot of people really do kind of reconnect with culture, get more involved. They want to learn more teachings because they want something to pass down to their child. And that's something we can certainly help facilitate where we can. So we have some ceremonies that we've been gifted as a program that we can do with families. But then we also will do a lot of networking to find out what is there out there, so that we can find some, if we have like a Anishinaabe family, we're going to make sure we get, we're going to reach out to Casey Church and be like, hey, we need a cradle board that works for, this family.
Casey?
I know. Yeah.
Casey, he's my cousin. Seriously.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's
right.
Awesome. Yeah. So, but those are things that we're going to make sure. I'm not going to make them a plain style cradle board, right? If that's not their cultural practice. And so where we can do those things, we do. Where we can't, we do our best, but we always make sure it's family centered and works best for that family.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that is so cool.
Yeah.
Jenna.
Thank you to our platinum sponsor, the American Dental Association, for making this live stream possible.
One of the things I thought was so cool, Camie, and so clearly clicked into my mind as like seeing the efficacy of this work in spending time with the moms and the doulas was like, and also speaking to you at length about it, was understanding how having support in these 3 phases of pregnancy, in prenatal, in labor and delivery, and in postpartum, each has a specific role to play. And that's actually how the article is structured as well, of like what are the doulas doing in each of these 3 phases, and how is that so how can that be so life-saving in reducing cortisol and like reducing toxic stress that is causing maternal morbidity, which is a problem equal or greater to maternal mortality, or it's leading to maternal mortality, right? So like, can you talk a little bit about how I think a good example of this might be Alana Harris, who is one of the women, one of your clients, and one of the characters in the article that shared her very traumatic birthing experience that happened in the past 4 months with us, that Hummingbird classifies as a near miss, meaning it was nearly fatal because of the way it was handled by the nurses in the delivery room, and mishandled rather, and the advocacy that Kristen was able to provide by being a knowledgeable person in the room that knew what Alana wanted, the mother wanted.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about the role of advocacy and how that can be so game-changing?
Yeah. I mean, advocacy is a big part of what we do and what distinguishes us from most other doulas. So kind of like a mainstream doula, or the mainstream doula model, largely, I don't want to say discourages against advocating, but really says like, we're the hands behind the hands. We don't get involved in that kind of stuff. Like, we might coach a parent to advocate for themselves. We might, like do that kind of stuff. And that's where we really diverge from the mainstream doula model, not just in like how long we work with families, but that advocacy piece is a big part of it. Because bottom line is, most of our families aren't safe to advocate for themselves in a hospital setting, right? I mean, they're already, I don't think I need to go into kind of like the historical trauma, and the impacts of like the mainstream health system and the power that doctors have over a family. And, again, most families just want to survive, and they want to get out of there with their baby. They don't want their baby taken away. And so there's a lot of fear with advocating for themselves, because they're afraid it'll look like, or be seen as like a negative thing that might get a CPS referral, right? And that's a very real experience for a lot of people. And so that's the thing that we can do, right? As doulas, as Indigenous birth keepers, we can be that person in between. We really see our role as protecting that space and protecting that family, and for this ceremony, right? And that's another thing that distinguishes us, I think, from a lot of other doulas, is that we see birth as a ceremony, and when we are there, we are protecting it, protecting that ceremonial space just as we would any other one, right? And so we may advocate directly with a provider. We may go out into the hall. We may, we're always going to do whatever the family wants us to do. But for a lot of people, they just don't feel comfortable. They don't feel safe doing it themselves. And for most of our moms, they're in freaking labor, right? Like, that's the last thing that you're
going on.
Oh, there's so much other stuff going on. Yeah. They are the most incapable of advocating for themselves when they're in labor, right? And so it is the responsibility of the aunties to do that, of the community to do that for them. So we do our best. We also work really hard to build good relationships with the providers. We don't always go in there all like Russell means, like, let's do it's like, we're not trying to like constantly create fights or anything like that, because bottom line is we want this to be a good experience for the family, right? So we're not going to make it about ourselves and our own fight. So we try really hard to build good relationships with providers, with the hospitals. A lot of the hospitals in the Seattle area know us. They know Hummingbird, and they know what that means when someone has a Hummingbird doula. And, our hope is that, and I think a lot of times we see this, is that, and sometimes it doesn't happen, but that our families are cared for because they know, oh, they have a Hummingbird doula. Like they're not just alone, right? Where someone's going to stand up for them. And there's lots of times where the doulas, will call me afterward when something, doesn't go great. Right. And they'll say like, hey, this happened. And then I can call the provider, I can call the hospital, and I can start to kind of like talk something out, build that relationship, and make sure it doesn't happen for someone else.
Well, Camie, talk about that Jenna mentioned that the 40-day postpartum, that what can health systems, what are the gaps, what are you guys doing to help reverse those astounding numbers? So
so I mean, one of the biggest gap is that most people, assuming they use a hospital-based OBGYN, which is where a majority of people deliver their babies, or whom a majority of people deliver their babies with, they won't be seen for 6 weeks postpartum. That in itself is egregious and unacceptable to me. So one thing we could just do straight out the gate is see families more often, right? But we also don't want families getting in the car and driving to the hospital and like going to a clinic where they're going to expose their baby to illness. They're maybe going to miss a breastfeed, right? Like things like that, because they should be home recovering. And that's where the doula comes in, is that we are kind of like that set of eyes, and we do pretty intense support in the first couple weeks after a baby's born. We're talking like 8-12 hours a week that we're with that family. So we're doing like 2 to 3 4-hour visits in the first week or two after the baby's born. And then that starts to taper off as the baby gets older, and that risk is reduced, right? As they get older. So, being in the home with the family makes a huge difference and is really protective, because we're able to kind of see if something's off. We're there to answer questions. We're much more accessible than a nurse's line, like, hey, I'm passing some pretty large blood clots. Like, this is what it looks like. And we can be like, yeah, that's not okay. We need to go to the hospital, right? Like those are the types of things that we should be able to do, where most people are left alone to figure that kind of stuff out. Right. And they're given these like arbitrary things to be aware of that most people are like, I don't know what that is. That the size of a golf ball? I've never seen a golf ball. I don't play golf. Like, I don't know, like that's the kind of stuff people are told. Right. So that's one of those protective factors that the doula can provide. And, and just in general, home visiting is really protective as a model, because you're in the home. The other thing is that it builds trust. And that's kind of getting back to Jenna, what you were talking about around like the importance of providing like prenatal care, labor and delivery, and postpartum care, is we spend a lot of time with families, right? Like, this is the thing, is we got to where we are. Our rates have gotten to where they are over the course of hundreds of years, and this is not something that's going to be solved overnight by just, like, oh, let's have people come back at 2 weeks postpartum. It doesn't work that way. Like this is the long game, and it's really about putting an effort in providing consistent quality care to families. And that builds trust in them, so that when something is off, they'll call us, right? Like they don't keep it a secret. They're not ashamed to tell us what's going on, because they know we love them. And we're trusted. And then the other thing is that because we know them and they're our community, we see when something's wrong, You know, like they don't need to tell us like, hey, I'm experiencing some perinatal depression.
Right.
We know this mom's different than she was a couple weeks ago or a couple months ago. We need to get that checked out. We need to refer her out because we know her and love her and know who she is. And we can see those changes, right? But when you just like are seeing you're one of 300 patients that a provider sees for a max of 8 minutes a visit, you know, once a month, like how can you really get to know someone in that way? You know, so yeah.
And so all of the mothers that I spoke with had expressed that exact sentiment of like also just having someone in their house with them that they're familiar with and that understands them and is helping, you know, like one of the doulas, Talia, would like hold the baby while Shannon's packing to take the baby to, you know, to the Southwest for its naming ceremony. So there's all of these components of like physical labor, like physical extra hands that are trusted hands to help in the house. And then also just like, like Shonda, another mother saying, Talia also just really helped me because I was disconnected from my community and I was feeling really overwhelmed by all of my obligations, my other kids that are crying and I can barely move because my cesarean. So, you know, there are all these like pretty basic concepts at play here that like when we see them play out all together, we're like, oh wow, it makes sense why that can be so life-saving.
Totally.
That's all the time we have, and I hate to cut everybody off. This is such a
it's okay.
No, it's a very serious topic. In Camie Chi-Miigwech, we've been talking with Camie Goldhammer, and she's doing fantastic work up in Seattle. And Jenna, thank you for the article. I know you spent months working on it, and it just well researched, well documented. You talked to a lot of people, so for those of you, we'll have it showing up on the screen. Have not read it yet, the article is The Rise of Indigenous Doulas. That was published by Native News Online on Thursday, co-published with Elle Magazine. And so we're so happy for this. And Camie, again, thank you. And I know you love your work because I smile that your work and your passion. I love it. And it's all about saving
lives. It really clearly is.
Yeah, saving lives and just doing it. I really applaud what you're doing. So
thank you. Yeah, I'm grateful. Kim and I were just on a walk and we were like, every time we're somewhere, we're like, what is this life that we have? Like, this is what we get to do. It's just so incredible. And it's such an honor and really is a gift to be able to do it and to be a part of this large network of incredible Indigenous workers that are all over the country, in Canada, Hawaii. You know, I mean, it's just really beautiful happening. And it's an honor to be a part of that. So, yeah.
Chi-Miigwech, both of you. And to our viewers, thank you for tuning in to another episode of Native Bidaské. We'll be back next week with another special guest. So in the meantime, be safe and take care of those babies out there.
All right, Toksha.
Thank you, Camie.
Yeah.
Thank you to our platinum sponsor, the American Dental Association, for making this live stream possible. If you appreciate what we do here at Native News Online, we invite you to donate to support our continued work covering Indian country. You can scan this code with your smartphone or go to the link located below this video to donate today. We greatly appreciate your support. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And be sure to scan this code or go to the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you for joining us today, and please be sure to join us again next week for another episode of Native Bidaské. Chi-Miigwech.